It's called Who Said It? Martin Luther King Jr. or Martin Luther? And there's some trick questions in here. So
maybe a little tiny, like 30-second reminder of who the difference between those two are, Pastor Javen?
That's a good question. Does anyone here want to tell us what the difference between Martin Luther King Jr. and Martin Luther is? Anyone? Okay, how about this? In roughly what years was Martin Luther King living? Anyone?
Or how many years ago?
Christy has it. Christy's raising her hand.
About like 500.
Yeah, so Martin Luther was just about exactly 500 years ago. So like around the early 1500s. How about Martin Luther King Jr.? That's actually the easier question, I think.
About 50 years ago?
Yeah, about 50 years ago. Yeah, in like the 50s and 60s. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. preached a sermon at Gloria Day from our pulpit that's still there in 1957, was it, Pastor Lois?
I think so, 57, yeah.
So Martin Luther was the one who started the Protestant Reformation that we've been, well, I guess we haven't really talked about that yet, but we will in confirmation. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights leader. So similar, different. Okay, here we go. So who said it? Martin Luther King Jr. or Martin Luther? Here we go. Oh, how to play. Video on. I can't see any of you now, so we're going to do like honor system. Keep track of your own points. And this is not true. Winner gets a choice trip to Memphis or Wittenberg.
False.
All right, here we go. Who said it? God writes the gospel not in the Bible alone, but also on trees and in the flowers and clouds and stars. If
so one hand is which one, and two hands are?
One hand is Martin Luther, two hands is Martin Luther King Jr. And again, I can't see any of you. Let me see if I can. And the answer is Martin Luther. You probably got that one. Okay. Next, who said it? I have held many things in my hands and I have lost them all, but whatever I have placed in God's hands, that I still possess. One hand if you think it's Martin Luther, two hands if you think it's Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a hard one.
It's a hard one. 3, 2, 1. Martin Luther. This is so weird to lead this when I can't see any of you. Okay, here we go. Who said it? Justice is a temporary thing that must at last come to an end, but the conscience is eternal and will never die. One hand for Martin Luther, two for Martin Luther King Jr. 3, 2, this is a hard one. 1.
Hard.
Martin Luther. How many of you got stumped?
We had a lot of two-handers. We had a lot of two-handers on that. I'm going to be real frank with you.
It had the word justice, so we all thought Martin Luther King Jr.
Exactly, justice.
No? Okay, here we go. Who said it? Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. One hand for Martin Luther, two for MLK. 3, 2, 1. That one was Martin Luther King. Okay, who said it? I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. I feel like this is a quote for our time.
Yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. MLK. Okay. Who said it? Peace.
It's fine. We don't need it.
what is this right? Peace if possible. Oh yeah, peace if
Mhm.
possible, truth at all costs.
What?
One for Martin Luther, two for MLK Jr. Peace if possible, truth at all costs. 3, 2, 1. Martin Luther. I was stumped on that one. Okay, who said it? Grant that I may not pray alone with the mouth. Help me that I may pray from the depths of my heart. Martin Luther, one hand. MLK, 2, 3, 2, 1. Martin Luther. Who said it? Science investigates, religion interprets. Science gives man knowledge, which is power. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. Wow. Okay, one hand for Martin Luther, 2 for MLK. 3, 2, 1. Martin Luther.
Oh, I got it wrong. Control. That's interesting.
Last question. Who said it? He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it.
Wow, that could be either one. All right.
No. One hand for Martin Luther, 2 for MLK. 3, 2, 1. Martin Luther King.
Nice.
Okay, so
good game. Good game.
how many of you got one wrong? Oh, Louise, all right. How many of you got 2 wrong? Oh, Jackson also had 1 wrong. Good. And I can't see all of you. How many of you had 3 wrong? Okay. And 4 wrong? Okay. We did good. We did pretty good. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm going to now pull up our announcements, which are on a separate PowerPoint. So close that one and pull up this one.
And if everybody who's just come in can change your name to show your pronouns and your grade, that would be helpful. If you're willing to be an adult leader tonight, you can put adult with your name. And that helps me so I can set up the rooms.
Thank you, Pastor Lois. Okay, welcome to confirmation. It matters that you're here. Thanks for coming. So Pastor Lois just said this, rename yourselves. If you've missed a night of confirmation so far, all of our little lessons that we do are on our YouTube channel, which you can find at gloriadaystpaul.org/confirmation. So even if you have to miss it, you can still make it up on your own. We care that much. Announcements. So next week is a mentor night for 9th and 10th grade, which doesn't apply to you. The following week, so 2 weeks from today, 9th graders are going to join us here. And we're going to talk about women in the Bible. And the reason 9th graders joining us is that 10th graders are going to join Mount Zion Temple confirmation students, which is something you all will get to do in 10th grade, but hopefully not on Zoom, hopefully in real life. Hopefully we'll be back to real life by then. And November 18th is a serve night. You'll be getting a packet in the actual mail to explain your options for that. The idea is that you will do some sort of service project together with your household or the people in your pod bubble, your COVID bubble. And there's no Zoom large group, mentor, small group, none of that happening that night. And we want you to select a project and sign up. This is for that serve night. We want you to select a project and sign up on the link you'll be sent so we can assist you. It looks like this. So you'll get a link that looks like this, where you can say what service project you want to do, and then we will make sure you have everything you need for your household to do this. Yes, I think that is all of our announcements.
Is there really a Tim who's in 9th grade here? And if so, you're in the wrong meeting and you should leave and join the other link. I will find the link for you and give it to you.
I've actually got it right here, Pastor Lois. I'll copy
Okay,
it.
great, thanks. If that's true, maybe you just made a typo, but I see a 9th grader, then you should move into the other room.
Coming to your chat window now is the link for 9th and 10th grade.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. So if you would all just close your eyes for a moment, and we're just going to take 1 minute. You've all had a long day already. Take just a moment to breathe and center yourself. And if you want, as you breathe, you can say to yourself, let go and let God, or I am not alone. Jesus is here with me. So take 1 minute. Okay, here we go. We're gonna get started. So I just want to recap what we've covered so far since we began this fall. So we talked about how the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, and God chose Moses to lead them out of slavery. And you remember they crossed the Red Sea, which is the scene depicted here. Led them across the Red Sea into safety on the other side. And God said, I've got this land for you. It's your promised land. It's Canaan, the land of Canaan, and it's all yours. All you have to do is wipe out the people who live there already, because it's full of people, and you just have to go battle them and conquer them, and then that land is yours. So the Israelites, they're going in through the desert. They get to the edge of the promised land, and they decide to send 12 spies just to go kind of scope it out and see how it looks. And the spies come back and they're like, holy smokes, those people are giant. They're like way bigger than us. We're totally going to get destroyed if we do battle against them. And there's 2 people, one of whom is Joshua, who says, nuh-uh, you guys, God promised God would give us this land. God was going to protect us. We should just go for it. But Joshua gets overruled, and because they're all too chicken to fight the Canaanites. So then God gets really angry, and God is like, you guys, I promised I was going to be with you, and I was going to protect you, and I was going to give you this land. All you had to do was trust me, and you didn't. And because you didn't trust me, I'm going to make you wander here in the desert for 40 years. So they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And at the end of that, Moses dies, and Joshua emerges as the new leader of the people. And Joshua leads them in this epic battle in the land of Canaan, and they wipe out the Canaanites and they inhabit the land. And Joshua says, here we are in this new land, our homeland that God has given us. God only wants one thing from us, and that is to trust, like 3 things: trust in God, believe that God is going to protect us, and follow the commandments God gave us. That's all God wants from us. And then Joshua dies. Okay, then comes tonight's lesson. And I found this really awesome short video that I want to share.
The Book of Judges. So remember, after Joshua led the tribes of Israel into the promised land, he called them to be faithful to their covenant with God by obeying the commands of the Torah. And if they do this, they will show all the other nations what God is like. So Judges begins with the death of Joshua and basically tells the story of Israel's total failure. The book's name comes from the type of leaders Israel had in this period. Before they had any kings, the tribes were all governed by these judges. Now, don't think of a courtroom. These were regional political military leaders, more like a tribal chieftain. And you need to be warned, the book of Judges is very disturbing and violent. It tells the tragic tale of Israel's moral corruption, of its bad leadership, and basically how they become no different than the Canaanites. But this sad story is also meant to generate hope for the future, and you can see this in how the book's designed. There's a large introduction that sets the stage for Israel's failure as they don't drive out the remaining Canaanites. Then the large main section of the book has stories about the growing corruption of Israel's judges, and the progression here shows how Israel's leaders go from pretty good to okay to bad to worse. The concluding section is really disturbing and shows the corruption of the people of Israel as a whole. So let's dive in and we can explore each part a bit more. The opening section begins with the tribes of Israel in their territories in the Promised Land. And while Joshua defeated some key Canaanite towns, there was still a lot of land to be taken and lots of Canaanites living in those areas. And so chapter 1 gives a long list of Canaanite groups and towns that Israel just failed to drive out from the land. Now, remember, the whole point of driving out the Canaanites was to avoid their moral corruption and their way of worshiping the gods through child sacrifice. God had called Israel to be a holy people, and that does not happen. Chapter 2 describes how Israel just moved in alongside the Canaanites and adopted all their cultural and religious practices. And it's right here that the story stops. For nearly a whole chapter, the narrator gives us an overview of everything that's about to happen in the body of the book. This part of Israel's history, the narrator says, was a series of cycles moving in a downward spiral. So Israel became like the Canaanites, and so they would sin against God. So God would allow them to be conquered and oppressed by the Canaanites, and eventually the Israelites would see the error of their ways and repent. So God would raise up a deliverer, a judge from among Israel who would defeat the enemy and bring about an era of peace. But eventually Israel would sin again, and it would all start over. This cycle provides the literary design and flow for the next main section of the book. It gets repeated for each of the 6 main judges whose stories are told here. Now, the stories of the first 3 judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah, they are epic adventures. They're also extremely bloody stories. Either the judge themselves or people who help the judge, they defeat their enemies and deliver the people of Israel. The stories about the next 3 judges are longer, and they focus in on the character flaws of the judges, which get increasingly worse. So Gideon, he begins pretty well. He's a coward of a man, but he eventually comes to trust that God can save Israel through him. And so he defeats a huge army of Midianites with only 300 men carrying torches and clay pots. But Gideon has a nasty temper, and he murders a bunch of fellow Israelites for not helping him in his battle, and then it all goes downhill from there. He makes an idol from the gold that he won in his battles, and then after he dies, all Israel worships the idol as a god, and the cycle begins again. The next main judge is Jephthah, who's something of a mafia thug living up in the hills, and when things get really bad for Israel, the elders come to him begging for his help. And Jephthah was a very effective leader. He won lots of battles against the Ammonites, but he was so unfamiliar with the God of Israel, he treats him like a Canaanite god. He vows to sacrifice his daughter if he wins the battle. This tragic story, it shows just how far Israel has fallen. They no longer know the character of their own God, which leads to murder and to false worship. The last judge, Samson, is by far the worst. His life began full of promise, but he has no regard for the God of Israel. He was promiscuous, violent, and arrogant. He did win brutally strategic victories over the Philistines, but only at the expense of his own integrity, and his life ends in a violent rush of mass murder. Now, a quick note here. You'll notice a repeated theme in the main section of the book, that at key moments, God's Spirit will empower each of these judges to accomplish these great acts of deliverance. Now, the fact that God uses these really screwed up people doesn't mean he endorses all or even any of their decisions. God is committed first and foremost to saving his people, but all he has to work with is these corrupt leaders. And so work with them he does. This whole section is designed to show just how bad things have gotten. You can't even tell the Israelites and the Canaanites apart anymore, and that's just the leaders. The final section shows Israel as a whole hitting bottom. There are two tragic stories here, and they are not for the faint of heart. They're structured by this key line that gets repeated 4 times at the close of the book. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The first story is about an Israelite named Micah who builds a private temple to an idol, and that gets plundered by a private army sent from the tribe of Dan. So they come and they steal everything, and then they go and burn down the peaceful city of Laish and murder all of its inhabitants. It's a horrifying story. When Israel forgets its God, might makes right. The final story of the book is even worse. It's a shocking tale of sexual abuse and violence, which all leads to Israel's first civil war. It's very disturbing. And that's the point. These stories are meant to serve as a warning. Israel's descent into self-destruction is the result of turning away from the God who loves them and saved them out of slavery in Egypt. And now Israel needs to be delivered again from themselves. The only glimmer of hope in this story is found in this repeated line in the last part of the book. It actually forms the last sentence of the story. Israel has no king. And so the stage is set for the following books to tell the origins of King David's family, the book of Ruth, and also the origins of kingship itself in Israel, the book of 1 Samuel. But the story of Judges has value as a tragedy. It's a sobering explanation of the human condition, and ultimately it points out the need for God's grace to send a king who will rescue his people. And that's the book of Judges.
So this whole book of Judges with the amazing artwork that you didn't see ends with the people saying, or with the words, in those days, you see it right here. In those days, Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so then it picks up after that with these leaders coming to a prophet named Samuel and saying, now we want a king to be our leader, just like all the other nations have a king. Choose one for us. God says, Samuel, do everything they want you to do. I am really the one they've rejected as their king. Ever since the day I rescued my people from Egypt, they've turned from me to worship idols. God says, do everything they ask, but warn them and tell them how a king will treat them. So then Samuel tells the people, if you have a king, this is how he will treat you. He will force your sons to join his army. Your daughters will have to make perfume or do his cooking and baking. The king will take your best fields as well as your vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his own officials. He will also take 1/10 of your grain and grapes and give it to his officers and officials. The king will take your slaves and your best young men and your donkeys and make them do his work. He will also take 1/10 of your sheep and goats. You'll become the king's slaves, and you will finally cry out for the Lord to save you from the king you wanted. But the Lord won't answer your prayers. And the people say, no, we want to be like the other nations. We want a king to rule us and lead us in battle. And so the point is, throughout this entire long story, it's like this story of God promising the people, I am going to be your God. I will defend you, protect you. I will have your back in everything you do. And the entire story is the story of these people that fail over and over and over again and refuse to put their trust in God and want to be just like everyone else. And actually, I think for us, because that's kind of how all of us are. We all fail to listen to God when God says, I've got your back, I'm going to protect you. And the good news of this whole story is that God continues to be the people's defender, even when the people turn away. Okay. Now, Pastor Lois, are you ready for us to go into small groups?
Yep, I think so.